Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our session today on responsible genomic data sharing, privacy, and security. This is a session that highlights some of the details that have been ongoing, some of the technical aspects, some of the other practical aspects, to making sure that when data is shared, it is shared in such a way that it respects appropriate privacy and security concerns. We have three really excellent contributors to this session. They're each going to present about 15 minutes, and then there'll be a small Q&A that takes place after that. So I'm going to introduce the speakers one by one as they come up, and then, as I said, we'll have our Q&A session towards or at the end. So the first speaker is J.P. Hubaux. Close. I was practicing that. It needs more practice still. JP is a full professor at EPFL. His research looks at the foundations and developing tools for protecting privacy as we get more connected in the world. So he's pioneered in areas of privacy and security in both mobile and wireless networks and in genomics. In addition to that, he's the academic director of the Center for Digital Trust and leads the ETH-funded project in data protection and personalized health. He's also one of the 7 commissioners of the Swiss FCC and is a member of the Information Security Task Force set up by the Swiss federal government. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to JP, and he'll give us our first session.
Good afternoon. Oops, voilà. So, yes, so I'm going to talk about data protection for personal health and give you a flavor of what we are doing here in Switzerland on this topic. So, there is this growing concern about medical data breaches. This website is known to all our US colleagues. For the non-US colleagues, so the US government has set up a website on which data breaches have to be reported. And if you look at what is happening there, you realize that actually most of the breaches actually are mistakes that are made, relatively low-key things like lost or stolen laptops and misplaced backups and so on. Yet this is a matter of concern, and there are like 5 declared breaches per week. And in addition to this, it appears that hospitals are targets of recurrent attacks of growing levels of sophistication. So WannaCry is a well-known example with devastating consequences, as you know, notably on the UK health systems for several days. Even before that, there were attacks against German hospitals, in this case again, for ransomware. Another concern is re-identification. This has been discussed extensively in the framework of the GA4GH. Re-identification attacks against genomic databases, and there is a body of literature on this topic since 2008 with the famous Homer attack. So what happens if genome data are leaked? Well, as we know, these data are inherently identified, and they cannot be changed. They have unique statistical regularities, and they contain sensitive and personal information, including genetic diseases or propensity to develop specific conditions. Right? So their leakage can expose individuals to genetic discrimination, and relatives can also be affected, which means that, as we well know, DNA is a crucial piece of information for all of us. And so moving into the field of personal medicine or personal health leads, let's say, to this challenge. Now, we have talked for years in Switzerland and abroad with clinicians and with IT specialists of hospitals and so on. And so from that, we have, let's say, identified a few let's say, requirements that have to be met in order to address this issue. First of all, the approach has to be pragmatic and gradually introduced because it cannot be disruptive, of course. One has to take into account the different sensitivity levels of the data, the difference of access rights. The existing data, as much as possible, have to be exploited, or used, and the solutions have to be future-proof. The consent, patient consent, a topic that has been also addressed earlier today, is absolutely fundamental. And one thing that unfortunately is not much addressed in the framework of GA4GS is the collection of the data by means of wearable devices, smartphones, etc. That part of the chain has to be protected as well. Now, in order to respond to this challenge, the data protection for personal health project has been set up. So this brings together 5 research groups across this so-called ETH domain, so it's across ETH in Zurich and EPFL, and the Swiss Data Science Center. The goals are to address the main privacy, security, scalability, and ethical challenges of this field. And as a consequence, it brings together specialists such as Effie Vallena. So actually, the third speaker of this panel is a close colleague of Effie, and is going to develop the let's say ethical dimension of this issue. The people working in data science, there is also Jacques Fellet, well-known geneticist, Dimitar Yechev, a specialist of cryptography and mathematics, my close collaborator Brian Ford for distributed computing, and myself. So our mission is within 3 years to come up with solutions that make sense and that can be deployed. Deployed means, you all reckon here the geography of Switzerland, so deployed across the 5 university hospitals. So we are here in Basel, but it will be also Zurich, Bern, Lausanne, Geneva, there are also Ticino, and then possibly St. Gallen. So this is, let's say, what we are aiming at. We already have a first deployment that is currently ongoing between Lausanne and Geneva for the first year, a small-scale deployment, and then we'll go for a larger deployment after that. So one has to distinguish between 2 main approaches, right, for this. Either you go for a centralized approach, where, so this is what, for example, what Genomics England is doing, or Human Longevity, 23andMe. But then the drawback, there is a single point of failure, and there is, let's say, legal and ethical and social constraints for the outsourcing of sensitive data. Right? And it cannot, of course, scale beyond a certain level. Or you go for a fully decentralized approach, but this can lead to high costs in some cases, and the scalability at some point becomes an issue. So what we are aiming at is something that is somewhat in between, where what we propose is a technique called Emedco, described in this paper. The goal here is to provide secure outsourcing that is enabled by collective encryption of the data. So the robustness is provided by robustness of the system is provided by the collectivity of the involved, let's say, stakeholders, provide end-to-end data protection through homomorphic encryption, and also provide, of course, GDPR or compliant, or its a Swiss equivalent, and an increased flexibility. Right? And so for this, we have made tests. The software is already running. We have made tests on something that is equivalent to 200,000 patients across 5 hospitals with 28 million mutations in total. So, and the query we raise is, for example, what is the number of patients with cutaneous melanoma and a mutation in BRAF gene affecting the protein at position 600, for example, right? In which case we would have 1 clinical attribute and 95 mutations, right? So this is run over, let's say, off-the-shelf technology that could be found in hospitals or research institutions nowadays, right? So let's say what is going to, so I'm going to show you a very short video of a demo. What is going to happen here is that there is a first stage in which all the data get encrypted and stored locally. Then the querier, so the one who generates the question that I just mentioned, fetches the genomic IDs that match his or her query, and then both the genomic IDs and the clinical attributes are encrypted. The query is sent to a node. The query is broadcast, blah blah blah, and the results are sent back to the querier. So the way it looks like is the following. Suspense, bam, voila. So here is the registration of the user with the password, login, bam. This is I2B2 interface. The query contains the cutaneous small adenoma and genome graph and protein change, blah, blah, blah. Fetch the variant IDs. Here the elapsed time to do this operation, 3 seconds. Encrypt, half a second. Bam. Then next step, send the query. Here the time is a bit accelerated to save time on the presentation, as you can see. And after 20 seconds, the operation is carried out. We have the decryption. And here comes the result. So we see that out of the 5 involved hospitals, there are, let's say, that many patients in each case where let's say, these constraints are found, or let's say these characteristics are found. Okay, now, so this gives you an idea of what is doable nowadays. Let me now utter, if you don't mind, the B word that maybe was not pronounced today in this room. So the B word is blockchain. Thank you. Voilà. So, believe it or not, for this we do run a blockchain. So blockchain has become a public embarrassment. But in some cases, in some conditions of temperature and pressure, yes, blockchains do make sense. And this is exactly the case here, because we do have a collection of institutions that are willing to work with each other. They can agree on the protocols, but they are unwilling to fully trust any of them, and they are unwilling to trust a trusted party, a trusted third party. And they want to have a kind of immutable log that is going to be a protection in case something wrong happens, right? It is, let's say, the usual logging that is routine in hospitals can be generalized to a community of hospitals or research institution by means of a blockchain. So blockchain, in this case, yes, does make sense. Now let me just mention a few events on to mention that in this community there has been a number of workshops that already took place, on a number of publications. There is the list. The last was actually Genome Privacy that happened yesterday, and that is mentioned here, with around 60 participants. Let me also mention genomeprivacy.org, the website that we maintain. It's a community website where all the research we know about genome privacy and security is mentioned. And let me conclude. So what happens is that worldwide, the confidentiality of health data is clearly in jeopardy, and personalized medicine dramatically increases the amount of data. The challenge becomes even more interesting. The mobile devices, I mentioned this again. I don't have the time to develop this, but I'm happy to talk offline about this issue as well. Mobile devices are going to play a major role and should not be forgotten. And so the DPPH project, Data Protection for Personalized Health, is actually, so this project is a response, at least a Helvetic response to these concerns. And I mentioned here 2 websites. The first is about the project itself. And then the tools that I mentioned previously and that I briefly demoed is also mentioned here. And we're going to put all the code, the source code, online, let's say, as open source in a matter of 1 month. I thank you for your attention.